Welcome to my channel. My name is Sherrilyn Dale. I am so excited that you found me. So excited, so happy, so all of the things that you found me. If this is your first time here, hi, hello, welcome. Over here, I generally talk about true crime cases. Sometimes we will talk about cults, problematic people and groups. And I feel like today's case kind of sums up the majority of those things, minus the cult thing. But I mean, I guess like an influential person that can continue to pull the wool over people's eyes. Anyways, if this is something that aligns with you and sounds like something you'd be interested in, I'd love for you to stick around. Please like, share the video, comment, subscribe, and make sure to turn on the notifications because I usually post once, twice a week, and I'm pretty active in the comments in the first hour of an upload. So I'd love to be able to say hi to you and thank you for being here and give you all the love. Put on the notifications so I can do that. Okay, sounds good. Let's get started. Before we do, I have a quick message for you. Thank you to our sponsor, Scentbird. If you have never heard of Scentbird, let me fill you in. They are absolutely one of my favorites. They are a fragrance subscription that lets you choose new designer fragrances every single month for only $17, which I think is so nice because if you don't have a lot of money that you want to invest in designer fragrances, this is a really good opportunity to kind of feel it out. I don't know about you, but there are so many times where I have been in the perfume aisle sampling some scents and thinking that I really loved something, sprayed it on myself, even committed and bought the bottle right there. And then as the day wore on and it just, like mixed with the chemistry of my body, it didn't smell the same and it just wasn't a scent that I was into anymore. So Scentbird gives you that opportunity to kind of give your smell a test drive. They have over 600 perfumes, colognes, a lot of unisex options to choose from. They carry brands like Gucci, Prada, Versace, as well as indie brands like Skylar, Heretic, and Confessions of a Rebel. With each fragrance, you will get a 30-day supply so that you can try it out and really make sure that you are confident in the decision before you commit to getting a full-size bottle. Sometimes a full-size bottle of perfume can be anywhere from like $150 to upwards of $300, $500. I personally like to allow the spin of the dice or the roll of the dice when it comes to the scents that I get, only because I've had such good luck with receiving something that I never thought that I would give the chance to and end up loving it. But if you are somebody who has your eye on a fragrance that you want to try, you absolutely can do that so that there are no surprises. These are the scents that I got this month. So the first one is Juliet Has a Gun, and this is Pear Ink, and this is one I was so excited to try. I don't know who it was who recently posted that they were into pear scents, but they totally sold me. I'm like, I would love to try a pear scent, and Scentbird entered the chat. And I just want to show you guys too. So this is the sample and it says 30 days, but these are like very generous 30-day supplies. They always last me longer than that. I love to travel with my Scentbird samples. I love to have them in my car, in my purse. So these are not your regular, like what you were used to getting samples from like your grandma or your mom's house. They have come a long way. They also have a nice little lock switch on here so that you can lock it to be able to travel, throw it in your purse, have it in your car without it leaking, and then just easily turn it. And then for me personally, I like, for example, switching out the colors of the scents that I like because I really like this pink one. So whatever flavor scent I'm into, I'll pop it in the nice fun pink one. Okay, quickly back to the scent. So this one, the Pear Ink, is green pear, ambrosia, and musk. And I think that's why I like it because it kind of starts off, you can smell that initial fruit scent, but then the lingering scent is more muskier, which I'm totally into. The other scent I got was Acqua di Parma Magnolia Nobile. And the second that I smelt this, I knew it was not the scent for me, but this would be so beautiful on my mom who likes more floral scents. This is quite florally. It's got bergamot, magnolia, jasmine, Madagascar vanilla, and sandalwood. It really is beautiful if you do like floral scents. For me personally, I don't, but I know somebody who will put this to good use. And then this one was the one that surprised me the most. This was Ormond Jane, and this is Sakura. This scent is one of the hardest that I've tried to explain, it almost smells like a powdery feminine cologne. For me personally, when I'm trying to explain it, it's like my initial scent is very nice and powdery, and then all of a sudden it's got like a kick of kind of like a masculine cologne tone. I am so obsessed with this. This is so on brand for me. The scents of this are lime, mandarin, pink pepper, cherry blossom, and vanilla. So I was surprised that there was like some cherry blossom and vanilla in there because I don't usually gravitate to them, but holy Hannah Montana. It didn't surprise me that I like the fruit stuffs. And I think it's the pink pepper that is just, I don't know what it is, blending everything so beautifully together. This is exactly is why I love to kind of let Scentbird decide what I should try, because I would have never tried this one out. Like I said though, you do have the flexibility to be able to try the scent that you have your eye on. They also offer flexible subscription plans, so you can pause, skip, cancel your subscription at any time, which makes it a really nice hassle-free experience. If you want to check them out, you can click the link in my description or head on over to scentbird.com and use my code Sherrilyn for 55% off. That is just a little over $7 for your first month to try out Scentbird, which I think is incredible. They are also available in the US and Canada, which I love when brands show us Canadians some love. So make sure to either click the link in my description or head on over to scentbird.com and use my code Sherrilyn for 55% off. Thank you again so much, Scentbird, for the beautiful samples and for sponsoring today's video. All right, let's get into it. Today's case is one that I came across about a year ago, and it was one of those ones that I would think about. Sherrilyn, let's finish the sentence. Think about on a pretty regular basis, and I would just get chills about it. And then my whole entire family got sick last week, still kind of fighting it off. And what do? I just consume all the docs that I possibly can. And Netflix, as it does, came in clutch for me. And I watched a documentary on this case. And it was interesting. I enjoyed the spin that it had. But there was a lot I feel like was kind of left out, stuff that I had come across after the fact. So I wanted to kind of jumble all of that together. Okay, I need an iced coffee for today. I keep telling people, because I've been so sick and I feel like I've been out of touch with reality and life, that I feel like Robin Williams when he came out of Jumanji and he was just like scruffy and had no idea what year it was. That's how I feel right now. So, iced coffee, friend. Okay, let's get going. So, picture this. I'm going to go very Kimberlea on you right now. I love how she just like paints the story at the beginning of her case. Imagine you have been in a traumatic car accident with your son. You both survived, but there was a lot of rehabilitation ahead, much more for him. And a surgeon says that he has a solution that can improve your son's quality of life. It's a groundbreaking procedure. You're scared, but he says his hands are better than God, and no patient of his has ever died, and your son is not going to be the first. So your son goes into surgery, comes out. There was a complication, but he's supposed to be okay. He seems to be on the mend, and then the surgeon calls you again, tells you the devastating news: your son is gone. You're shattered, you're angry, you want answers. You file a lawsuit to get justice for your child, and you indicate to the surgeon that you trusted that this is going to go through. And he continues to call you though and support you through everything. He wants to make sure you're okay, and will do whatever it takes to make you see that he cares. And slowly but surely you start counting on these calls and texts to get you through. You look forward to them even, and your anger towards him is replaced with feelings of longing and eventually love. The two of you travel the world. You think maybe this is the reason all of this happened. Love in unfathomable tragedy. You start a life together. You two have a child together. You pinch yourself every day that this world-renowned surgeon and pioneer in his field has chosen you. And then your world crashes down again. You are not the only one. Your partner was engaged to another woman. The Pope was even going to marry them. And the woman he was to marry is a journalist who has just exposed all of his lies. And they don't just involve you, and your son was not the only patient to die under his care. Those patients who were given a second chance at a more fulfilling life from his invention, almost every single one of them is dead. You just realize you have started a life with the real life Jekyll and Hyde. Now, I know this probably sounds like the plot of a movie that you would have a hard time believing was true, but buckle up. This is true. This is the case of Dr. Paolo Macchiarini. Dr. Paolo Macchiarini he's described as a very, very charismatic, charming, world-renowned surgeon. He travels the world for his patients. He says that he was the private surgeon to presidents like the Clintons, Barack Obama, even the Pope. He speaks 5 to 6 languages. He's, on paper, a very impressive man. Now, he made waves worldwide in the transplant industry when he created this groundbreaking 3D printed artificial windpipe. It was made to order through scans of the patient, and his vision was to have a future where lungs could be made from plastic and you could save a lot more people because you wouldn't be waiting on organ donations. That would be a thing of the past. In theory, it sounded incredible. The procedure involved replacing the patient's actual damaged trachea with this plastic replica, and the replica was to be soaked in the patient's stem cells so that your body could pretty much do the work. It would kind of take over this transplant, rebuild new cells, and kind of become one with the patient. He was backed by one of the most prestigious medical facilities in the world. It was the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And his invention kind of won him international attention and praise and news coverage almost overnight. He really became like this superstar celebrity in the medical field. One of those patients who thought that he was being given a second chance at life through a miracle with meeting Dr. Macchiarini was an American man named Chris Lyles. Chris's family, in every interview that I've seen with them, they absolutely just light up when they talk about Chris. It's clear he just had so many incredibly loving qualities about him, but later on in life, his main focus and passion was being a dad. He had a little girl named Erin who his family describes as his mini-me, his shadow she. Wherever Chris was, Erin was, and vice versa. And all he wanted to be was just like the best father that he could be for his daughter. In 2011, when Chris had just turned 30 years old, the family was given some really devastating news. Chris was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He had a tumor on his windpipe and was given about 6 months to live. Chris took this news with a lot of determination and bravery. He was like, I'm going to beat this. I am not giving up. I am walking my daughter down the aisle for her wedding. I am going to be there and I'm going to do whatever I can to get there. So he started radiation, did chemo, and it all kind of got to the point where everyone was saying we've pretty much exhausted all of our options at this point. We can't really do anything for you. And so his sister started looking into stem cells, and she came across a interview that Dr. Macchiarini had done with Diane Sawyer, and he's talking about this groundbreaking new windpipe invention. So Chris's family reaches out to Dr. Macchiarini and they are floored that they get a response from him. He looks into Chris's case and he's like, I think I can help, which is huge. He's the only doctor since this diagnosis who has said those words, like, we think we can help. Everybody else up until that point had been just basically like, there's nothing to do. So Chris and Paolo start talking on Skype at first, kind of getting to know each other, getting to know the diagnosis and what the plan is going to be. And Chris is really hopeful Dr. Macchiarini pretty much tells him that the problem is that you've got this growth on your windpipe, and the surgery is just like way too meticulous to remove everything, thus removing the cancer. So if we remove the windpipe and replace it with this plastic windpipe, that essentially cures you. We've removed the cancer completely and put in a new windpipe. So Chris is like, really, there's nothing to lose. He knew there was a risk. He knew it was experimental. But a big thing was the fact that the Karolinska Institute was backing Dr. Macchiarini, gave him a lot of confidence. So Chris and his mother flew out to Sweden to get his surgery with Dr. Macchiarini. The day of the surgery, again, Chris, he jokes, he's like, I'm the guinea pig, aren't I? And Paolo's like, no, like, don't think like that. You can't think like that. He's giving him confidence and reassurance that he's the perfect candidate. This is going to be okay. The surgery was 15 hours. Chris comes out of the OR and Dr. Macchiarini tells his mom it was a success. After the surgery, Dr. Macchiarini he's off. He's out traveling the world, going to conferences, preparing for other surgeries. So he wasn't involved in Chris's aftercare. It was his assistants and colleagues that were. And quickly, Chris got an infection that was in the airway. He developed a really bad, deep cough. He was getting mucus clots that were clogging the tube. So he's brought in for more surgeries to clear everything, take care of the infection, which prolonged his recovery to get home. And Chris was like, all he's thinking about is his daughter. He's gotten this far. He's got this windpipe, now this infection. Like, he's like, I just have to get well enough to fly, get back home to Baltimore to Erin. And he did. That was his goal, and he made it home. Within about a week of him being home, though, he suffered more complications. He was rushed to the hospital and died from those complications. Obviously, this is absolutely devastating for Chris's family, and especially a lot of people who had heard about his story from around the world. I think specifically in the United States, this was kind of the launch into the vision that Dr. Macchiarini had, and everybody is obviously so hopeful for something this groundbreaking to be happening. When he passed, though, everybody they understood, and they thought, all right, this is the benchmark, and this is what can be. This, Chris didn't die for anything. We're going to learn from this mistake, and we're going to move forward, and he's going to be a pioneer. Chris's family, after his death, still 100% supported and believed in Dr. Macchiarini's work and his vision. And so that's why when they heard about his next patient that was making headlines, the youngest recipient to receive an artificial transplant, she was only 2.5 years old. Her name was Hannah Warren. And when they heard about her story, Chris's family was so hopeful. Hannah's transplant was going to be a year after Chris's, and her case was different than Chris's. She was actually born without a windpipe or trachea. It's described as an extremely rare condition, and in the majority of cases, almost 99% of the cases, it is fatal. So since birth, she had lived in an intensive care unit in a Korean hospital. She had a tube that was inserted in her mouth. That's how she breathed. So because she had that, and then I don't know why this word is so hard for me to say. I'm like overthinking before I say it. Developmental, there we go, problems. Hannah couldn't eat normally and couldn't speak normally, like I can right now, apparently. So Hannah's parents were told shortly after her birth that there were some treatments that they could pursue for her condition, but that the odds of her living past the age of 6 were quite slim. And I mean, like any parent, they think to themselves like, okay, well, essentially, I guess that's great to extend a couple years, but you don't want a couple years. Like, you want to do whatever you can to have your child forever. So Hannah's father, like Chris's family, started investigating and looking into other treatment options out there. This is when he also found Dr. Macchiarini's work. He was able to get in touch with Dr. Macchiarini and convince him to come to Illinois and do this procedure for Hannah. just the same as the Lyles family, Hannah's parents are like, you know, this was at kind of like our last resort, our last attempt of having her longer than 6 years. And this is the time to do it. This is when she needs this the most. We're going to have our daughter for the rest of our lives, at least. Now, this is when in the story, several other stories are going to start intersecting. So I'm going to do my best to try and keep everything like nice and easy to flow as possible. But we're going to start adding other players, okay? While Dr. Macchiarini is preparing for Hannah's surgery, NBC news producers are looking for a story to produce, and they're wanting it to be in the regenerative medical field. They're specifically looking for medical breakthroughs with the goal of having like replacement organs and where we're at in the world with that. So naturally, the name that they keep seeing popping up is Dr. Paolo Macchiarini. I think it was pretty obvious to everybody involved in the project that this was somebody who was bold and was taking risks, but was willing to put his name on those risks, you know, in the name of progressing medical advancement. So NBC reaches out to Dr. Macchiarini and he agrees to be interviewed and be kind of like spearheading this special. During the first interview, like introductions of everything and how it's all going to go, he meets one of the producers that's on the project. She's a single mother named Benita Alexander. And Benita talks about this moment. She says she'll never forget that second that he walked into the room. Everybody's just kind of, you know, in their lane, doing their thing, getting all prepared. She says she looks up and sees him, and at the same time he looks at her. They, you know, lock eyes, and she like gets these butterflies. And she says like it's pretty clear just from like the electricity in the room at that moment that he was probably feeling the same. But she just doesn't even know how to process this because she's never reacted like this in a professional setting. Like she's a journalist, now a producer at NBC. Like you don't get butterflies over the subjects that you're working with. So she's like, WTF is that? Let's just push that down and go back into producer mode. So the special, it was called A Leap of Faith, and it was with Meredith Vieira as the reporter. And the plan was to follow him during this whole journey of him preparing for Hannah's surgery. And it's definitely really touching to see you see the moments of him interacting with, you know, this little 2.5-year-old, and he's asking her if she wants to get her tube out, and he kind of touches it and she says yes, and he's, you know, kind of pats her on the face. He just seems like very close, connected, compassionate. You know, as her parents, seeing that as the surgeon, you'd be so thankful. As the producers of NBC, you know, there'd be absolutely no concern. Like, what a heartwarming, inspiring story and caring man, which kind of makes you want to cry and then, you know, throw up a little bit knowing what happened and that, you know, knowing what he knew. So Benita Alexander, she's producing, spearheading this whole thing, and they're following around Dr. Macchiarini a lot, not just for doctor surgical stuff, but he's a really interesting guy. Like, he's jet setting, he drives a motorcycle, he's like this charming Italian doctor, and so they want to capture all of that. And then obviously on off times of the shoot, like you build a relationship, like a camaraderie with the person that you're filming, like making a project on. And she said, you know, there were several times where those butterflies would still, you know, kind of start fluttering, and she just like swat them away. But just the nature of the project and how everything was going, there was definitely like a connection forming, professional, personal, whatever. After long shooting days, they would often have dinner, not just by themselves, but it could be by themselves. And she said, like, through those moments, like just even off screen, she was really touched with how caring he was, not just with his patients, but also her. Like, he had, it seemed like, actual general interest in getting to know her and learning more about her. And she's like, you know, this is an accomplished surgeon who is known around the world. He's, doing groundbreaking things in his field, and he's got so many questions and interests about me. So she said this kind of, progressed. And then one evening after a shoot, they had dinner at one of the hotels that they were staying out in Illinois. And after dinner, they got on the elevator. They were each on a different floor, staying in separate rooms, and his stop was first. And so when the elevator doors open, he was gonna leave, and then turns back and opens the doors up, and he kisses her. And it was just like this very magical moment. Sparks flew. It sounds like they probably wouldn't have even noticed if behind them the elevator plunged to the ground at that moment. So she's really taken back, but knows okay, this is something. I've been feeling something. She's, enamored. She tries really hard to just keep reminding herself, I cannot be falling for him. I got to keep this professional. We're in the middle of shooting this piece. But he's quite persistent. He lets his feelings be very known. He's constantly checking in and sending messages to her if he was off traveling for other patients and surgeries in between shoots. He was in constant contact with her, letting her know that she was on his mind. And from there, it just kind of eventually flourished into this fairy tale romance. Their first trip together, he surprises her and takes her to Venice. And this is just, she describes one of many surprise trips. He liked to throw surprises. Often she had no idea where she was going. It was pack for this many days, plan for this weather, but you don't know where we're going, and would fly and just be surprised with where she was going. So she was also showered with love and attention and gifts. Everything was the best of the best all over the world. Money was not an option. And, it definitely, it worked. It caught her attention. It caught her love, and she fell in love with him. Keep in mind, all of this is happening pretty fast. And while this is happening, they are still working together. She's trying to keep it kind of more on the down low, and Paolo's YOLO, I love you. Eventually, they get to the day of Hannah's surgery. Her surgery is 9 hours, and it was on April 9th at the Children's Hospital of Illinois. Her surgery was the first of this kind to be performed in the United States. It was approved by the FDA, and it was approved on the grounds that it was an experimental procedure, but being done because there was otherwise little hope of survival for the patient. And looking deeper into everything, what I found was really wild was how many questions people had, and they just rolled with it. Not putting anything on the parents or anything like that, but professionals and journalists writing on the piece, and other doctors. And I wanted to just read a quick quote from one of the pieces that was done and published for Hannah. Doctors are not exactly sure what happens after implantation, but think that the stem cell signals the body to send other cells to the windpipe, which then sorts out so the appropriate tissues can grow on the inside and outside of the tube. Because the windpipe uses only the child's own cells, there is no need for drugs to suppress the patient's immune system to avoid rejection of the implant. So this was written, and it's doctors aren't really sure how this is going to work, but this is how they think it's going to work, which I don't know. When I read that, I was kind of taken aback. Oh, I love that I just exposed myself that I'm wearing pajama pants. Just ready from the waist up. And this is what the common theme was. It wasn't just about the journalists writing it. This is the information that they're getting from medical professionals. We're not really sure what happens, but this is what we think is going to happen. This is what we're hopeful is going to happen. And this is why we aren't doing this, because the body should do this. Anyways, Chris, everything seems to be successful, right out of the gates coming out of surgery. There obviously was cameras from NBC following the story, and it shows that she, Hannah seems to be very playful and playing around with Dr. Macchiarini and the nurses. One of the really touching moments of the thing was when Dr. Macchiarini is talking about the first time that Hannah realized that there, wasn't the tube in her mouth. And when she closed her mouth and was just had this look of oh my gosh, it's gone. And he explains that moment of being so beautiful. So very early on out of surgery, Dr. Macchiarini says that Hannah is doing very well. He does say that there were some complications from the surgery, but that the trach, like the windpipe transplant itself, was doing great. Unfortunately, all was not great. Hannah had to have another operation about a month after her transplant operation. It was a surgery on her esophagus because it had never healed properly after her surgery. Unfortunately, even though she went for that second surgery to try and correct the problem, things went sideways very quickly. They declined very fast, and little Hannah, she passed away in July 2013. Everybody is obviously extremely devastated. There had been so much hope. And I would almost say almost like this naivete that everything was going to be okay because this was so deeply inspiring. Of course, you don't allow yourself to really think much besides this is groundbreaking. This is huge. And I can't believe that we're a part of this moment in history. And despite Benita being in a relationship with Paolo, she's equally as shocked and devastated. And she's like, what happened? Why didn't it work? And he tells her and everybody else who had concerns that it had absolutely nothing to do with the transplant. It was from the other complications that happened and then other health-related issues that she just had. And that's how things had kind of, been flipped to still progress moving forward. It was, Hannah was a pioneer. We knew things were not 100%. And looking back, she wasn't really the ideal candidate. That being said, Dr. Macchiarini always insisted that the trachea was never the problem. It was her own tissue that was very fragile, and that his hopes and plans moving forward were that he was going to continue with similar operations, but because all of these cases are so complex and so difficult, there wasn't kind of much to say at that point besides the fact that he was confident that his invention had nothing to do with her decline. So for NBC's side of everything for this special, they have to go with the story, report what's happening, and it kind of turned into this piece that was going to solely focus on Hannah and what they hoped was going to be the success of this surgery turn into a hope for the future. And so followed along with everything and then the aftermath. And they even met with some of Paolo's prior patients, Chris Lyles specifically, with his family, just to kind of show they're even, the families who were clearly devastated and so heartbroken that their family member isn't here. It's not for nothing. There's hope, and they still support his vision, and they know that their loved ones are, again, pioneers in the future of this advancement. That's another really touching, emotional, upsetting piece to see. Chris Lyles' family interacting with Dr. Macchiarini after Chris's death, after Hannah's death, and just still having so much faith in him. And Paolo interacting with Chris's daughter, who looks at him and says, I love my dad so much. I wish I could go up to heaven and be with him just because I love being beside him all of the time. That's how much she missed him. And she's just I wish I could just go and be with him again. So his mission from then on was just Chris and Hannah have not died for for nothing. And the others, we need to move forward. We do not have a right to stop. We've come this far. And this is something that I guess it could be controversial, but it's not something that I don't disagree with if your method is showing signs of success and growth, not repeating the same technique with the same methods, expecting different results, and then just, moving on from patient to patient, doing the same things, and you're kind of wanting the results to be different at the expense of someone's life. And that was starting to be the concern of some of Paolo's colleagues. They absolutely stood by him and saw and believed in the vision, but they knew that there needed to be adjustments. And when those types of concerns were brought up to Dr. Macchiarini, like he didn't want to hear it. It was, just we know what we're doing. There's nothing wrong with this. It was like health issues. He wasn't wanting to change anything. And the answer was always that it was related to something else and never his device. Another concern that his colleagues had was it's easy to say all of those things and feel that way, but he was always on the go. And pretty much like right after surgery, he wasn't there. So he never saw the aftermath and wasn't there for follow-up and aftercare of the patients. He was off kind of like living his own life, and colleagues were kind of feeling like after, prior to surgery, leading, all of that leading up, and then surgery, he's very easy to get a hold of. He's on it. He's so dedicated. And then after, he's off and he's busy, and he is very busy. So time reference, this is around Christmas 2013. Paolo is in New York City. He's with Benita, that's where she lives. They're celebrating Christmas together. And after this dinner that he cooks for her, just the two of them at her apartment, he proposes to her. She accepts it, but she knows, logistically, there's definitely a lot to figure out. He is, like I said, a very busy guy, and so is she. They're always on the go. She lives in New York. He has a home in Barcelona, and they don't really have these long periods of time where they can, just be together. And a perfect example of this is right after their engagement. They're going into the new year, 2014, and she's trying to make plans, and Paolo's like, I don't know if I'm going to be around for New Year's. And she's like, what the hell? Like, we just got engaged. What do you mean? Obviously disappointed. And he's like, I might be in surgery. And she's like, who has surgery on New Year's Eve? He's just kind of like, I can't really say. I don't know, patient confidentiality, but she's like not giving it. So he finally tells her that he's a part of a network of doctors, and they work with like the elite and celebrities. That network of doctors is pretty much on call for these people whenever they need them. And at that time, Hillary Clinton needed surgery. And, these people, they want their privacy kept. So this isn't something that you would be able to like look into on the news and figure out. And he was close with Bill Clinton, and Bill had personally called and been like, we want you to be a part of this. So she feels stupid for even, being upset and questioning, completely understands. And as the months went by and they got closer, like she would learn even more about that kind of side of his life. It became a very normal thing for him to kind of at the last minute be on call and having to fly around the world to attend to, world leaders, Barack Obama, the Pope even. Like, he's going everywhere. He is like the top guy, the top surgeon for the top people, which to her made her kind of, like fall further in love and like respect him even more, that he was so talented and respected in his industry to be the one trusted to care for these people. That was definitely impressive and worked for, even Benita's friends and family. There were certain patients that he allowed Benita to share with them that he had on his roster. He even talked about a story of him getting the call when Lady Diana got in her car accident and him not being able to get there on time and blaming himself for her dying because he had believed that had he been there on time and been able to perform the surgery, she would have survived. So everybody's quite impressed, quite enamored by him. And they're really excited that Benita is going to marry him. July 11th, 2015 is the date that they had chosen for their wedding. And Paolo told Benita that he wanted to take the reins on the whole thing. He had this very elaborate vision. He wanted this to be like the wedding of the century. He didn't want anything overlooked, no expense to be spared. And he also wanted it to kind of like be a surprise for Benita. And initially she's like, no, like this is my dream. I want to plan my wedding. But her friends and family are like, listen, like everything that he has done up until this point has been, bang on. He has incredible taste. Money is no object, and he's probably going to take whatever vision like you have in your head for your big day and just completely blow it out of the water. And so she's like, you're probably right. So she relinquishes control and lets him plan everything. Now, he wouldn't share like every detail with her as he was planning, but there were kind of like breadcrumbs along the way. On one trip that he was on in Rome, he said that he had made a meeting to go to the Vatican and talk with his connections that he had there. He said that his vision was, this like elaborate Catholic wedding, but both of them were divorced. And so he wanted to see if any of his connections could help them find a way around that. The next thing she hears about this meeting is that he spoke to the Pope himself. Remember, the Pope is one of his patients. And the Pope told Paolo, I'll marry you guys. And Benita just thinks he's like messing with her. She's like, no, like, does the Pope like marry people? And Paolo's like, no, I'm being 100% serious. We have a really great relationship. I told him that I was just kind of wanting recommendations, and he's saying he wants to do it. So after getting off the phone with him, she's still not sure if he's just kind of like messing around with her. And she Googles, does the Pope marry people? And then she finds out that a recent article had just been published where he had just married like 20 people like that year. They were also people who were like living in sin and had been, living together prior to marriage or had children outside of wedlock. So she's like, oh crap. Like, I guess the Pope is the Pope and he can just marry whoever he wants. So obviously she's on board with the Pope being the one to marry her and her dreamboat surgeon fiance. So things are, getting underway. They're going to have this beautiful, elaborate wedding at this castle in Rome. And the guest list, I mean, if I was Benita, I'd be pretty intimidated. Like, this is, very exclusive. The Clintons were going to be there. The Obamas were going to be there. Andrea Bocelli was going to sing while she walked down the aisle. Elton John was going to perform at their, after party. But something really touching and in very, Paolo fashion, she thought, was that among this huge guest list of, these elite names were also some of Paolo's patients' family members that he remained close with, including Chris Lyle's family. Chris's mom and sister were so touched and honored that they were invited. They quickly went out and got their gowns for this wedding, bought their plane tickets, could not stop telling anybody and everybody who would listen to them that they were invited to go to this wedding in Italy, chance of a lifetime. Now, the plan for Benita, her daughter, and Paolo moving forward after the wedding was for Benita and her daughter to move to Barcelona and live with Paolo at his home there. Naturally, prior to getting married, she wants to see the place, see where she's going to live, bring her daughter, show her daughter the home, make sure, that it just fits. Sometimes you're with somebody and you're so caught up in everything, and maybe both of you have a property and then you end up moving into your partner's property and there's just something that it just never kind of feels like your own. So it's kind of good to have those conversations and experiences out there prior to committing. 4 times Benita and her daughter had planned and scheduled to go out to the Barcelona property, their future home. And every single time at the last minute, there was something that came up with Paolo and the trip was canceled. I believe every time it was for an emergency surgery or follow-up with a patient. Fun fact, completely irrelevant to this, but just kind of give some context. And I don't know if it's different because I'm in Canada, but I worked for a plastic surgeon for quite a few years prior to, content creating. And in Canada, at least, you rotate call with you, in your field. So you're not really jet setting around the world on call 24/7. And he had said that he was part of this elite group of doctors who would be on call. So it doesn't seem like it would always be on him, but I could see, the rationalization with Benita just being he's super popular. But just as the date is getting closer, she's anxious, and that's natural. Like, there's still so much to do, and she hasn't even gone out to see where she's gonna live. Meanwhile, some of the guests are all also super anxious, excited, anxious, but wanting, like, there's buzz, like, oh my gosh, this would be a huge thing. And one of those people were Chris Lyles' sister. She describes herself as a planner. She wanted to have like her entire trip mapped out, not just the wedding, but where they were staying, what area, restaurants that were nearby, landmarks that she shouldn't miss. So she reaches out to this castle that all of the guests are going to stay in to get some recommendations on the best way to travel, transportation when she gets out there, all that good stuff, right? So she calls and someone in the staff answers, and they have no idea what she's talking about. There is no reservation for any guests of a wedding party for Dr. Paolo Macchiarini or Benita Alexander. So she calls Benita to just be like, I feel like you should know. We're all going, and apparently they don't know we're coming. So Benita's concerned, obviously. She immediately calls Paolo, and he's just cool, calm, completely collected. And he's like, she probably spoke with like one of the front staff people who doesn't really know, like they're not privy to this information, especially because like this is a big deal. Like we've got the Pope coming, we've got big elite people coming. Like there's only certain staff that deal with these types of reservations. And everyone was like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Cool. We're going to trust you. He's a doctor and a highly sought out, respected doctor who's gaining more and more and more popularity at that. So not only was there that piece that NBC was doing on him in the US, a couple other documentaries were also in the works, and one of those was following Dr. Macchiarini again and another patient, and this was going on in Russia. This story was following Dr. Macchiarini and his patient, 33-year-old Julia Tulik, and kind of what had transpired here was after Hannah's death, Dr. Macchiarini had sought out approval from Russia to carry out his trials over there. And he felt like the reason why his transplants were not successful is because the patients that he was operating on had pre-existing conditions that were inhibiting success. So ideally, he wanted somebody who could benefit from the surgery, but that was in the best possible physical health. So Russia approves, and they pretty much put out like this lottery where you could, if they asked for candidates to either write in a letter or record a video and just kind of tell your story and say why you feel like you would be a good candidate for the surgery. So Julia Tulik, this young mother, she makes a video and she talks about how she was in a very devastating car accident, one that had left this hole in her throat. And aside from the hole and just like the discomfort and social awkwardness of having it, she was in pretty good health. So she won the surgery. Like Hannah's documentary, there's a film crew, the entire step of the way. And they get pre-surgery footage, post-surgery footage, and it's, again, really touching. One of the first things she asks when she gets out of surgery is, am I going to be able to play with my son now? And Dr. Macchiarini, is, again, just so soft-spoken and compassionate, and he's like, yes, you're going to be able to play with him as much as you want. Days after her surgery, her and Paolo, they go in front of this, medical board and journalists, kind of, I don't know, a little press conference, and make a speech just to show this grand success. She even is able to speak, which I think everybody was just so inspired by. And she's just I'm feeling good. The next step is just to properly heal and move on with my life. What the documentary didn't show was follow-up after that point. And who knows if anybody would have known what had happened had it not been for an investigative reporter who had received a tip to look into Dr. Macchiarini and his patients who kept dying. So initially, this investigator kind of went into it thinking, This is probably just like an attempt at a smear campaign. Like, he's a surgeon, does controversial surgeries, I guess, but he's, you know, like his main backer is the Karolinska Institute. Like, he's legit. So he goes into it like pretty unbiased and just wants to look at it from all angles. Right away, he does see, yeah, okay, Dr. Macchiarini does have patients who have received this transplant and have died, but he is not out there presenting himself as having 100% success rate. He's the first to admit that his method may be controversial and that there are patients who, you know, have pre-existing factors that may have led to their surgeries not being a huge success, to say the least. So when he gets to Julia's case, he watches the documentary, reads all of the reports, and he's like, I mean, here we go. This is a perfect example. Here is proof that if you do not have, you know, certain detrimental pre-existing issues, this can be life-changing. He and his team want to reach out to Julia, follow up on how it's affected her life thus far. But they run into issues tracking her down. Eventually, they are able to get into contact with Julia's mother, though, and they explain that they're just doing a follow-up on Dr. Macchiarini's patients and that they would very much like to speak to Julia. And her mother says, yeah, you can speak to her, but you will have to die first because she is dead. And this investigator is just like gobsmacked. They had just, you know, he and his team had just watched this inspiring documentary. They're like, you know, what happened? She was so good. And Julia's mom said, no, like it's fake. The way that they presented that is so fake. It was a complete scam. She said her daughter was mutilated and died a very drawn out, torturous death, one where she was like coughing up pieces of her flesh and essentially suffocating to death on a daily basis. She says like she's just so thankful that she has the opportunity to speak to anybody because her daughter's dying wish was for her story to be told, and she wanted to save anybody out there from going through what was happening to her and what ultimately happened to her. So the team reaches out to the documentarians who did this documentary, and they request some of the raw footage that they can look through because they're saying like, you know, we're doing this piece. We'd love to kind of get it, but, you know, backside insight footage that you would have from like actually following him around. And their request was granted. They are given raw footage, everything that was filmed, and what they found on there was sickening. It was proof that Dr. Macchiarini and colleagues were aware that there were defects in the device prior to her surgery. There were 3 devices that were made. That's normal to have like, you know, backups on hand. And every one of them was defective. One of them was 3 millimeters too short. The other was completely defective. It had holes in it. And then the third one was way too weak, like it was collapsing. This is all being filmed, like figuring this out. Dr. Macchiarini being like, did the devices come? And his colleague being like, yeah, but we have some concerns. Do you want to hear them? And he says all of this. And on camera, he says, we don't really have a choice. We are going to proceed and we're going to go with the one that's too short. Like I feel like I want to vomit just thinking about that. Because again, I do this all the time, you guys. Let's just take one moment to just like ground and center ourselves and remember that I am not just here telling you a story. This is real life. This was a patient. This happened. That footage is just so bone chilling. It's like goosebumps on your bones. Like not just on the skin, but like under the surface of the skin, chilling. That prior to the surgery, you see Dr. Macchiarini just like reassuring Julia, telling her, you know, everything is going to be so good. Everything's going to be okay. All of her dreams moving forward are, you know, moments away, right up close to her, very compassionate, just like with Hannah. All of this, knowing damn well that every person prior to had died, their deaths were not peaceful in any way. One of his patients who had lived the longest experienced pure agony, drawn out torture, requiring hundreds of surgeries just to stay alive in the worst conditions. I just like to try to process how you could look at a young mother's face, tell her, that she's going to be able to play with her son, just knowing damn well the facts and the prior history. At this point is when all of the other pieces, all of the other thoughts of, wanting to better the world, advance medical surgeries for the future, save more lives. There are risks with that. And I think that anybody would know that. Dr. Macchiarini himself says, like the first heart transplant, was that successful? The first kidney transplant, there is a space for all of that, but you lose that defense and that argument when that footage is shown prior to Julia's surgery, where every device was defective and he decided to go through with the one that was like the least defective. There is even a scene in her aftercare in this documentary where she asks, like, is something wrong with the implant? And he's like, what? And she's like, is something wrong? She can barely talk. And he's like, no. And she's like, is it bent or something? Because like, I can hardly get air. And he's like, no, it's all good. To know that she ultimately did end up dying, it's just like, to see that is sickening. Like, just, I want to cry, I want to throw up, and then I want to roll around in the tears and the vomit. That's disgusting, but that's how I feel. And then I want to scream. I want to scream right now. One thing Julia's mother said when she spoke to this investigative reporter is like, there was just like, she beats herself up because she just had this like gut feeling. There was something about Dr. Macchiarini that she never ever trusted. She said she watched him like almost seduce Julia. It was like he put on the charm and he weaved her in this web to try to gain her trust. Like some of his colleagues had said, their concerns were prior to surgery, he was available at Julia's beck and call as well. Anything she needed, any questions she had, he was available. And then after her surgery, Houdini, gone. And how unsettling, like, to put yourself in her shoes, like having that, you have that faith, you have that connection, you have that trust built. And then her mother said it wasn't even, 2 weeks after surgery, she's experiencing severe complications. Her mother said that first implant just like never had a shot. It failed and it was replaced at the end of 2013. And then she ended up dying not that long after. The bottom line is it absolutely shouldn't have happened. He was looking for somebody who was, relatively healthy to prove that this worked, and it didn't. And there were concerns before that this was not going to work. It was faulty, yet she's just being led, to the operating room with them already knowing and having this conversation, and goes in. And you insert this and it doesn't work. And to think that she was given the reassurance that could be a very successful surgery because we need a candidate like you to show it. We need somebody with your health to show that like it can work. And she was willing to do that, knowing that, of course, there's a risk with anything, but it's just the way that it's presented. And it wasn't dire for her to have. This was not a life and death surgery for her to have. Of course, she had like the hole there, but like I had mentioned, it was more of just like an inconvenience and an insecurity and a little bit of a discomfort for her. This was not crucial surgery to save her life. And then to think about the amount of people, that knew about this too, including those documentarians, because they had that raw footage, obviously. There's people filming right there while that is all going on, then filming the surgery, knowing that he just decided to do this with something that was too short. Oh my gosh. Like, can you imagine? That would just rip me apart, being like, people knew that. And then you sat there and you filmed it. You filmed it happening. But even if the excuse was, oh, like we just trusted him. If he's going to go through this, we're not doctors. We just believe that he knows exactly what he's doing. That's fine. But when the documentary was done being edited and ready for release, they reached out to Julia to let her know, like, it's all edited. We're going to be releasing it. do you want to pre-screen it? And she replies back to the filmmakers being like, no, like I am not doing okay. She said that she was, I believe, less than 40 kilograms, which is like less than, I think, 80 pounds, could barely walk. She couldn't breathe. She said, this will be a little bit, TMI or like a little bit unsettling for people, but I think it's worth knowing just for context. She said that the smell of like her insides rotting was so pungent that she couldn't even like be near people. She wrapped up her email after describing all of, the hell that she had been going through at that point, just saying, the artificial tracheas are, quote, pure shit. Sorry to say so, yours, Julia. That's how she signed it off. And they released it anyway. Like there wasn't even a moment to pause and be like, you could have even done like an expose piece at that point. You had all of the footage. You had all of that. It just, I don't know, for somebody who actually truly wants to talk about cases and raise awareness and expose this type of shit, like if you had that footage, what are you doing? Like that, you're still making a piece. If that's truly what your mindset is that disgusting, like that you're just like, oh well, we already filmed it, so we've got to like put it out there. Well, you can still put it out there, but you put that in there, like you expose that. There's just no way that I could try to spin it to make it make sense for me why that was released and why there at least wasn't something written in there about Julia's condition at that point. Yeah, I just don't know how you could sleep at night. I'm fired up. I feel like my cheeks even just got a little bit redder because I'm just like, just warm and sauced right up right now. Anyways, we know that ultimately Julia died. And while the investigative journalist and his team were finding this out, there was simultaneously another investigation that was going on looking into Paolo, and this was actually from his colleagues, the ones that were constantly left like holding the bag, of these patients that were dying after their surgeries, and he's nowhere to be found, and they're just having more and more concerns. And this part gets like really dark. It sounds like it kind of all they were obviously, they had their reservations, their concerns that they were bringing up, being like, this is what we're seeing, this is how this patient's doing, this is how fast they declined. But they're being told like, we just got to keep following through. It's because of this issue. It's because of this issue. And not really knowing where that data was coming from. Like prior to those patients, it's almost like there was always just something as they were trying to move forward. And so this is happening, and it all kind of clicks at a conference that they're all at, and that Dr. Macchiarini is giving a speech at, sharing like his vision and the work that he had done thus far with his colleagues and other surgeons. So as he's presenting his studies and his research thus far, he gets to the point of what the results of the trials, like specifically the animal trials, were, and just completely bypasses it. And at that moment, the colleagues are like, oh my God, there's no animal data. He hasn't tested this on animals. He has been testing this on humans. They're the trial. I can imagine how like sick and confused that moment would have been for any of them that were putting that all together at that point. Because of course you're a medical professional, you're a doctor, you're a surgeon, but you put your trust in your colleagues, especially those colleagues that are, higher than you and more respected than you, and that you're part of this vision. You just, I guess, would go on that blind faith. So 4 of Paolo's colleagues from the Karolinska Institute get together and voice their concerns and are able to finally talk amongst each other and start pouring through the data that was used to kind of get all of these trials approved in the first place. This was something that was really risky for all of them to do because of the status of the Karolinska Institute, they didn't want to risk their own jobs by just going with these concerns being did you not vet this guy? What the hell? This is what we think. So they got their investigation going amongst each other. They had made fake emails, fake names to gather everything so that they weren't exposing themselves. And they were able to put together an extensive report based on all of the reports of Dr. Macchiarini's Macchiarini's patients and that data. What they found was that he had committed medical misconduct by omitting or falsifying information that was about the conditions of at least 3 of the patients that he was writing on, and that was published in medical journals. I was able to go and look at some of these. They are still out there, but they're covered like from before you even start reading, even throughout, where it just says redacted throughout it, but it gave some insight as to how it had gotten to this point and so far. The data in there states that there were no major complications. There were the 3 main patients that were used, and of those 3, there were no major complications. They were asymptomatic, and 2 of them, he said, were tumor-free after 5 months of their transplantation. The truth was, and these colleagues that were looking into this knew this and understood when they figured out which patients the 3 patients were, was that they did not go on to live these healthy, vibrant lives. There were no reports after the 5 months. So past that point, there was no follow-up. It was just like this, at the 5-month mark, they are doing great. They are asymptomatic and tumor-free. And that is what we are going to submit and use to continue getting backing and support to carry on our trials. For example, one of the reports was on patient number 1, and that was a 36-year-old man named Andamariam. And he had received the transplant because he had allegedly throat cancer that was reoccurring. This, I guess, is not something that had any proven in biopsies to substantiate the claim. But on his report for the medical journal, it says that his follow-up showed healthy cell growth within the tubes. But attached to this report was that follow-up and that inspection with, the camera going down the throat. And what the colleagues were able to see is that actual footage did not match the written report at all. And their doctors, they are seeing what they're looking at. And what they see is no cell growth whatsoever. The plastic tubing, you see the plastic tubing, and parts of it are collapsing. Those collapses are suffocating him. And in certain areas of the transplant, there's rotting that's happening, which for these doctors seems clear to see, but that report, and that's what's getting submitted for funding and approval for trials, does not mention that. I think something that's really interesting too is that when they looked at Andamariam's autopsies, it showed that he had a severe chest infection. There was a blood clot in his lung artery, and that the plastic trachea that was, in him was completely loose. Something the autopsy didn't find was there was no remaining cancer, which was basically like how that experiment was justified by Dr. Macchiarini, was that, we can't get rid of the cancer and we got to do this. Chris Lyles was also one of the success cases, but we know that Chris did not survive. And then there was Yasim Setter. I know I'm butchering the name. I'm so sorry. And her story, I think it was briefly touched on in the documentary on Netflix, but it's just like, oh my gosh, I just can't even imagine. It's so sickening. And she was kind of presented in these trials as the most successful success case because she had survived the longest. She had been alive the longest with this implant, which is true. She survived over 4 years, but it was 4 years of complete hell, actual living hell, not just a dramatic term. I can't imagine living in the conditions that she lived in. So Yasim was a 22-year-old. Her operation was in July 2012. And I guess she had initially had a nerve surgery in Turkey that was supposed to cure like her sweat glands, like she was like over sweating and her hands were really sweaty. And then ultimately what happened was she got like a severe injury to her trachea and her right lung was no longer functioning. This, I guess, is very kind of similar to Julia's story in the sense that it wasn't a life-saving surgery. There was obviously the discomfort. She is explained as having kind of like deep like cough that was just kind of unsettling in social situations. It kind of embarrassed her, but nothing that was going to end her life. She was at no risk, but she went on just to have a kind of more easier life. And what ended up happening, Dr. Macchiarini inserted the plastic tubes. It quickly started leaking and failing and collapsing inside of her. She was given a second surgery with Dr. Macchiarini to put in a new windpipe that also failed. And ultimately this was removed to save her life. But like just the damage of this that was done to her body was way too late. She experienced blood clotting, kidney failure, her esophagus had to be removed, and her airways had to consistently be cleaned out every 4 hours daily. And the doctors that explained this process explained it as being torturous. It wasn't like, oh, we're gonna just do a little cleaning here. Like every 4 hours she went through torture, and it was torture for her medical team to do to her. All of this follow-up, all of those cleaning, like 4-hour cleanings, I guess I don't know how to explain it, was all carried out by Dr. Macchiarini's colleagues. Though it's not something that he saw on the daily basis, and that was, I don't know, having to like face. Once he was done that second surgery and she wasn't doing as well as he wanted, it was always because of something else. It was a complication to this, it was a complication to that. So he left and went on, wrote his little jacked up report and presented as her being a success case because she lived in this agony for 4 years. Of those 4 years, she was in the intensive care unit at the Karolinska Institute. She was in hospital. She underwent over 200 surgeries, multiple other organ transplants, and the hospital staff said that she had gone through like nearly 40 near-death experiences where she had to be revived. What's really unsettling is that basically throughout all of this, she was mostly conscious and aware of what's going on, but was not able to like breathe and communicate with them. It just, oh my God, it's sick. After 4 years of living like this, Yasim ultimately died, and her medical team had basically said, you build like a bond with your patient, and obviously you do everything that you can to make them comfortable, keep them alive. But because of what she was going through on a day-to-day basis, and even the trauma that does to you, seeing that on the day-to-day basis, it was almost like a relief that they knew she was not suffering anymore, because that's all she had done for those last 4 years of her life. And then when you think back and be like, this didn't need to happen, because her surgery, like Julia's, was not life or death. This was not necessary to do this trial on her. And then what's sickening is because of these false reports, these misleading reports, over 20 patients received this transplant, and almost every single one of them died. One of them survived, and it was because they were able to get the transplant removed in time, but everybody else was dead. And so with this discovery, the colleagues, they put together all of these reports, the correct data, the fact that all of these patients had died, and then they sent it to the vice chancellor of the Karolinska Institute. All of them are explaining, during this time, they're just like, oh my God, it's sent off. This is real life. They're just sitting there behind the scenes, holding their breath, wondering what the hell is going to happen from this point, and nothing. The Institute doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything, and they keep Dr. Macchiarini on board and keep funding the experiments. I can't even imagine. Little did they know there was another article that was being written on Dr. Macchiarini, and it was published in the New York Times. This article, though, when all of the other ones had kind of like painted him as like this groundbreaking revolutionary, surgeon making all of these positive waves in medical future, this contained leaked information accusing him of misconduct and of falsifying reports and performing experimental operations on his patients. So this is released, and like with the New York Times, it made waves, and it was like the catalyst of a much deeper investigation and expose that was going to happen. Now, for time reference with him and Benita, this was November 2014. They're getting married in July 2015. So the wedding's coming up. Benita wakes up, she's in New York, and she wakes up to this article that's been released and all of these accusations. So she calls Paolo trying to figure out what's going on, and he just says there have been issues in Sweden that, I've just kind of gotten out of control. When you're, a pioneer like me, people, they want to take you down, they're jealous, and this is jealousy among my colleagues. So that weekend he arrived in New York to have Thanksgiving with Benita and her family. And she said that when he arrived, she could just see like his spirit he was really broken. He looked devastated, like he's on this mission to do well. And because of haters, his reputation may be completely unrepairable at this point. So he's crying, he's breaking down, and she just goes into like professional journalism mode. She helps him write responses. She's the one who takes the brunt of the emails, just doing what she can to explain the situation, keep his spirits up, and, help the man that she loves, because she also sees this vision, believes in this vision, and 100% believes that all of these allegations are completely false and had just like stemmed from pure jealousy. And it's hard not to understand exactly where she was coming from because, given the reports and the fact that the Karolinska Institute was still standing by him, supporting him after this huge controversy, it just kind of reiterates, those feelings they're valid, and you have faith in your man and he's telling the truth. And on top of that, once those colleagues had presented their findings to the Karolinska Institute, it was almost like a switch had happened where like the heads of the institute were like trying to come for them, like trying to dig into them and see what they could find to make them look bad. The KI Institute, they go public and they say like, we have looked into everything of our own. Like, we are aware of the controversy. We are aware of the allegations, and we have found no proof of misconduct. So the whistleblower colleagues, their reputation was like shredded. It was the heads of the Karolinska Institute had basically gone to law enforcement and were like, you need to look into these guys. There's some vendetta out there. Couldn't understand why they would ever try to take down Dr. Macchiarini. So can't imagine what that would have felt like, having these feelings, finding data that corroborate like your findings, your thoughts, and then being told like, you're a hater. Here, go talk to the police because you're trying to take us down. Anyways, this is kind of when two investigations start to like intersect. So it's between those whistleblowers, the colleagues who have just gone to the Karolinska Institute, found out all of this information, and then also with the investigative reporter who had found out about Julia dying. They kind of collaborate and start exchanging the facts that they know on both sides. Something that both sides knew that was going to be really critical is that there was no confirmed reports of animal tests that had been done. And this was important for a couple reasons. One, because we knew on video, there was video after and Mariam's surgery, where he says that Dr. Macchiarini had told him that he had done this operation on pigs and that they were healthy and that they were happy and it was a success, and that was a comforting factor for him to go forward. So we knew that it had been alleged that there were tests done. And that, I guess, like as an ethical scientist, like that is just what you would assume is being carried out. Like you have your idea, your vision, your invention. Prior to going to human trials, you are going to experiment on your animal subjects. I guess pigs are commonly used for like any airway experiments. And basically, like the way that it all plays out is you make your invention, you do your experiments on your animals. Once you feel like you have it down to a science, if you will, you then present that to, unbiased peer review studies, present it at conferences, show all of your data and statistics. Keep in mind, these stats should show how many of those pigs in every experiment survived, for how long, what the complication was. You would have to prove that your invention works, it's not toxic, and it is the better alternative than a donor transplant. So then at that point, like once all of the facts are presented, once it is out there and there is a peer debate and everybody agrees that this is the solution and the best alternative for donor transplants, then you go forward. However, and this is where it's really important, there's a way to, I guess, bypass that by having consent from the patient and having an institute allow you to operate at their facility and are on board and support. This kind of feels it feels problematic and concerning in itself, but not even, like, we're not even gonna touch on that. The fact is, we know that consent was not properly received in this case. The patients had given Dr. Macchiarini consent under false pretenses, and we know that. He told them there were successful pig studies done, pig testing. Mariam is on film with it, and so is one of his earlier patients. Her name is Claudia Castillo, and she also talks about the pig trials. Now, she had surgery. It wasn't the plastic implant. This was like, I think, an experiment prior to, and it was like a silicone tubing, kind of like as a stent in your lungs. And she went through with this because she had complications in her airways from having tuberculosis. Now, as per a report that was written about Claudia, I believe it was in the Daily Mail, she says in it that she was given two options by her surgeon, Dr. Macchiarini. And I just want to read this. She said, "He told me he could either take out my badly damaged left bronchi and lung, or he could try this new procedure. We had a very powerful emotional conversation about the choices I had. Either I could have my left bronchus and lung removed and live like an invalid, or try this new procedure, which I may not survive, but which would change my life. I was deeply concerned. I thought about my children. I wanted to be there for my children. I knew the new procedure would be risky, but in the end, my quality of life would be so much better. That and seeing the pigs were my deciding factor." So she says that Dr. Macchiarini had told her that he had practiced the surgery on 4 pigs and that they were all doing well. Claudia even said that she met the pigs. She said through meeting them, that is when she found the strength to make her choice. She said that they were kept in a sty behind an operating theater at Barcelona University, and she said she watched as they happily fed together and foraged in the straw, and then what she could see was scars along their backs, which were telltale signs to her that there had been surgery done. The article goes on to say that she received her graft, which was implanted as a bronchulus transplant. And then, fun fact, this organ that he inserted in her was prepared without the knowledge of authorities in a veterinarian lab of Martin Birchall. And a lot of things that I found about him are totally sketch as well. And this was done at the University of Bristol. So it was made in like a veterinarian lab, according to this article. So after her surgery, she was worse off though. There was infections and debris from the poorly biodegradable stents that were inserted. It was Paolo's colleagues as well with her that carried out the aftercare for 3 years. And then in 2016, everything was just way too much. She couldn't live like this anymore. And she, at that point, said, like, remove my lung, which is, you know, what was one of the options that was given before, saying that she was just going to have the worst quality of life, that she was going to be an invalid. And she was like, do it. And I think that would be a really hard part that I keep going back to with these patients is feeling like you had all of this trust in him, you know, like, oh, we've got the pig, let's go meet the pig, let's go see the, you know what I mean? Like, you're just building these bonds. He's giving you options. He's there for you. And you're being love bombed constantly. And then it's like, as soon as he's done with you and like, heaven forbid you have a complication, like, he could not be bothered. Let's go back to Benita, because she is a professional turned personal example also of this love bombing. So we're going to take it to May 13th, 2015. It's her last day of work. Remember, she's getting married July 2015 by the Pope. So she finishes up her day at work, and then her and her good friends have this like spa day, girls spa day, to just like celebrate and just completely unwind and refresh into this next chapter of her life. So as she's leaving the spa, she looks at her phone because it's just been tucked away during all the services, and she sees that there's an email, and the heading of the email just says the Pope. So she opens up the email, and it's from her friend, and it says, yeah, the Pope is not going to be in Italy. He's actually going to be in South America on July 11th on your wedding, and this has been planned for a really long time. So yeah, I don't think he's going to be there for her wedding. And she's just like, what the fuck? Like, I just quit my job. Today was my last day. So she immediately calls Paolo, and he's actually on his way to her from just landing at the airport to come and stay with her. And she's like, what in the crap is going on? I just finished up my last day of work. My friends have planned for this. My family has planned for this. Like, your dead patient's surviving family has planned to come to this wedding. I've got the dress, they've got the gowns, like the whole 9 yards is done. Like, what the hell's going on? And he's like, please calm down. Like, I also just found out about this, and I'm looking into it. I do not know what's going on, but I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So she says, like, he gets to her apartment, and he's super calm, and she's still freaking out. And he's trying to calm her down, like, listen, I need you to calm. Like, I never wanted to embarrass you, but there's something I need to tell you. She's like, what? And he's like, you know the network that I was telling you about that I'm a part of? Well, it's a network that works for the CIA. And this whole surgeon thing, like, this is just a cover up. I'm actually a sniper for the CIA. And she's like, what? He's like, I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you, but I have no other option now but to expose myself, because I can't lose you. And she's like, this is so messed up. Like, I don't know you. Doesn't take it as like oh, okay, you're a sniper for the CIA. No, she's like, why me? Why are you doing this? First of all, what the heck? Like, why is this my life right at this moment? She's like, but I'm a journalist. Why would you keep this? At one point, I'm going to pry. Like, that is just in my DNA. And she said at that moment, she just got chills, because he just like looked at her, and he's like, yeah, I know. That's why I love you so much. So she's sick, because she's just looking at him, processing, being like, oh my God, was this intentional? Like, is this a game? Did you choose me because I'm a journalist and this is a challenge for you? So she goes into like full investigative reporter mode. She tells them, okay, like, we need to let all of our guests know that for the meantime, we are canceling our wedding. I need to process this. I don't feel like I know you, and I don't know what to do. And he's wanting to make it work with her. So he's like, yes, okay, you know, whatever you need to do what you need to do. So they send out their email. They're like, you know, unfortunately, due to unseen circumstances, we're postponing the wedding. We're just as heartbroken as you are. and then she starts processing. But meanwhile, she's contacting all of these places that were supposed to be a part of this wedding that she was never, allowed to contact before because he was the one doing the planning. Starts with the Vatican, and Pope never heard about their wedding, was never ever an option, was never going to officiate their wedding. She also finds out that Paolo was not the Pope's private surgeon, nor was he close to the Clintons or the Obamas. They were not coming to their wedding. Nothing he said about that part of his life was true. One thing she felt very confident that was true was that he did live in Barcelona. She had, seen the house numerous times, did like walkthrough tours on video in his closet, all of that stuff. And she had the address because she had tried to fly to go and visit it, and multiple times she was going to go live there. She and her two best friends book a trip to Barcelona. He, at the time, was supposed to be in Russia for surgery. So the three of them drive to the house after they land in Barcelona and make the decision that Benita is going to stay in the car and kind of figure it out from there. But the two friends are going to go up to Paolo's door and see if he's home. So they knock on the door, and sure enough, he answers. So he's not in Russia. And her friends say like he's just shocked, like almost white to see them. Like, what are you doing here? And they're like, oh, we're on vacation and we're just in the area. So we came to see how you're doing. Like, what's going on? And they said like he couldn't get them off of his step fast enough. And from where Benita was sitting in the car, it's kind of up on a hill where she could see a part of his property and see the door and see that he had answered. So she knew right away, prior to her friends even coming back, that he was home. But she also sees a blonde woman and two kids, and she can hear the kids saying dad. Sure enough, those children turned out to be his son and daughter, and he had a wife. The woman was his wife, named Emanuela. I cannot even try to process the rage that I would have in that moment. Like, she said that prior to seeing the children, there was every intention of her to go up and confront him. And I respect her so much for just being able to pull it together and not going to that side of like lunacy that I probably would, because she's like, the kids were there. So I stayed in the car. I don't know what I would have been able to do traveling to Barcelona, getting that far, seeing that. I'd just be sick. Like, she quit her job. She planned this whole life with him. Like, this wasn't just some guy she was, casually talking to on the internet or something. Like, her daughter was gonna, leave her school, was looking at the schools, getting all excited about the schools that she was gonna start and move into this house. But it gets worse. Yeah, if you can imagine, Benita and Paolo's wife were not the only women in his life. This is where our story at the very beginning that I had you imagine comes to light and enters the building. I think this shows how twisted, diabolical, the depths of conning with absolutely no remorse that this man will go to is shocking and sickening. Enter Ana Paula Pedrosa. In 2009, Ana Paula and her son Danilo were in a devastating car accident that changed their lives. He was intubated from the accident, and then from there he had a trach. So a couple of years after the accident, he's referred to Dr. Macchiarini, this ENT professor, with this groundbreaking surgery that he wanted to give to Danilo to improve his quality of life. Naturally, for Ana Paula, like as a mother, she's concerned. Danilo was older, but she was, that's your baby, that's your son. So she talked to Paolo and she flat out asked, like, is this something that if he does, like, he can die? And he's like, absolutely not. No patient of mine has ever died, and your son will not be the first. So those are pretty, like reassuring words and build some trust. And Dr. Macchiarini, he operates on Danilo. And after surgery, Dr. Macchiarini goes to Ana Paula and he says, okay, like surgery is done. There were complications though. And he right now he's placed in an induced coma, and he needs to be there for he's going to be in a coma for a week. There was an artery that burst. she's worried, freaking out. He's like, it's okay. Like, the artery is repaired. We need him to heal. So this is like the best way to move forward. So a week goes by. Her son wakes up. She says he seems to be doing well. You know, he's not able to like speak to them, but he's like squeezing hands, nodding yes, shaking his head no, making eye contact. Like she's very aware that he is very aware and seems to be on the mend. Then one morning comes and she gets this phone call that there's a hemorrhage and he is going in for emergency surgery and that she needs to get to the hospital immediately. So when she gets there, it's just absolute chaos. She calls Dr. Macchiarini and he's not there. So he's reassuring her. He's like, everything is going to be okay. Don't you worry. I'm on the phone with the surgeons who are there. So it's like I'm there. I'm going to walk them through everything. He's going to be okay. And I will call you when he's done. And so she says she gets the call and he's like, I'm sorry. He didn't make it. She is devastated. This is something she was already so nervous about her son doing, and she's mad. So she files a complaint against the hospital, and she wants the doctors that were in that surgery held accountable because she believed that it was like their negligence that caused her son to lose his life. After speaking with a lawyer, she learns that all surgeons and doctors that were involved, like from that first surgery even, were going to be investigated. And so Anna Paula, who's still in contact with Dr. Macchiarini, lets him know. And he says, you know, like you do what you have to do. I know I didn't do anything wrong and everything's going to be okay. And then from that point, she says that he wasn't like upset. He wasn't offended. He didn't take it to heart. He understood and he supported and he was in constant contact with her every single day. She said he's the one who's comforting her and not even really talking about like the investigation that's going on much. He's wanting to make sure that she's okay. And every day she's like looking forward to and expecting and waiting for the call. And as the days go by, you know, her grief is turning into happiness. Like she has something to look forward to every day. She knows that he's going to call, and that those calls progressed from, you know, him being a supportive, I don't know if you want to say like friend or comfort, to him kind of pursuing her romantically. So they started a relationship, she said, kind of naturally, traveled the world. She went on surprise trips. Money, you know, is never an issue. She's just like showered with gifts, sweeping her off her feet. Same like Benita, you know, same fairy tale, just a different princess. So their relationship stayed like pretty much under wraps for 2 years, though. Even when they went on trips and stuff, like all of the photographs of her, like from her back, there's never like her face in anything. And Paolo just said that it was just to kind of keep the integrity of the investigation and clearing his name all intact, because clearly there's like a conflict of interest there if the mother of the son who died, who is suing the hospital and the staff, is now in a relationship with one of the surgeons anyways. So he wanted to make sure, like before they went public, like he was cleared. In the meantime though, by 2013, they had a daughter together. He bought an apartment for them in Rome. And all of this is going on while he is married with 2 children in Barcelona and engaged to be married to Benita in New York. And so when Benita went to Barcelona with her friends and saw what she did, everybody's world collided at this point. And for her, it wasn't even so much of like exposing him as a cheater, scum. You know, there are, I'm sure, some good doctors and surgeons out there who aren't faithful, but it doesn't mean that they're not talented. But for her, though, it was the extent of the lying and the deceit. And she thought, if he lied to this extent and is this believable for the past 2 years, there is no doubt in my mind that he could lie about his credentials and his research, and that there's a possibility that you know, that expose in the New York Times that she defended him so strongly over could be true. So at this point, she was like, this is like deceit on another level, and people's lives are at danger, or in danger, at risk. So she had a connection at Vanity Fair and reached out to them to write an expose. And this expose, it was done just, I guess, perfectly, because this is at the point where the investigation with the whistleblowers and the investigative reporters from Julia's story, they're all releasing things pretty much at the same time. So everything is just like falling like dominoes. Once her story gets published, this is how Ana Paula finds out. So at this point, Benita and Paolo's wife didn't even know about Ana Paula, and Ana Paula didn't know about them. But a journalist contacts her in Rome for comment, and she's like, what the hell are you talking about? So she opens the link to the story, and the first thing she sees is a photo of Benita and Paolo, and they're on a gondola in Venice, and Benita's kissing him, and she's like, what in the shit? So she falls apart, calls him like, what is going on? And she said, Paolo's like, it's a lie. She is lying. This is the woman that I went to do the documentary with for NBC, and she's obsessed with me. She fell in love with me. And she's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, she's not a stalker. I can see the photos of you in Venice. You're in a gondola and she's kissing you. So she's just dumbfounded, losing it. And she's like playing back all of these like moments that they had. And she's like, oh my God, he took me on a trip to New York. This was a work trip for him, but he wanted to take her along for some of it. So she went for like 2 days so he could take her around and do sightseeing with her. And then she said at that point she stayed in the hotel and he went off to go and do work, and then she flew home by herself. And really she's like, oh, that's because she lives there and he was actually there to spend time with her, but took me along for some of the trip. And then once Ana Paula saw photos of like Benita and him from their trips and in Rome, she's like we were together at that point. I remember like he was there. So there are points where he's also doing that with Benita, you know, taking them to one lady's hometown, taking the other lady, doing some sightseeing, and then shipping her off so that he could stay and spend time with the local lady there. So Ana says she is just absolutely destroyed. Understandably, I'm sure that that's actually an understatement of the feeling that she had felt putting all of this together. She's like, oh my God, like how could he use me at the most vulnerable state of my life. She's grieving the loss of her son, and meanwhile he's scared of being intertwined into this scandal and investigation, and so he holds her close, abused his power and trust, and then took it to the level of not just having a relationship with her, traveling with her, showering her with gifts. He has a child with her. Like, if that is not diabolical, I don't know what is. She said at this point, like, there was nothing that he could say to make her stay or believe him. She left that relationship. And from what I could tell, his wife also filed for divorce, or they possibly finalized divorce in 2016, based on what I could see. And at this point, like, we have no idea how many others are out there. I would not be surprised if at this point, like once the Netflix is out and more people watch it, that other women come out. So after all of these kind of exposés come out, the Vanity Fair one from Benita and then the one with the whistleblowers and the investigative reporter, it gained so much media attention, kind of in different areas of the world, but areas of the world that he had made his mark. It made a lot of people upset. And at this point, there was no more defending him that the Karolinska Institute could do. They did end up firing him, but it almost just kind of seemed like they made it like they didn't really want to, but didn't have an option because of the outroar. Like, there's no denying that they were given proof. There is a trail of the fact that they were given proof of his lies and his misrepresentation and his false data and reports, and then they covered it up to keep him on. And yeah, it was a good image, I guess, for them up until that point, because he's like, you know, you've got me on. I'm making all these waves. Like, we are going to, you know, be world renowned. You guys are going to be famous. And that's what they wanted. Allegedly, once the initial concerns had come out by the colleagues, there was falsifying that possibly was done through some of those reports to include that there was animal testing done. I don't know. I have not seen. From what I can see, everything is like redacted right now. Everyone's like, so even if that was out there, everyone's like, that it didn't happen. So in 2022, Dr. Paolo Macchiarini, he was charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault, and that was for Mariam, Chris, and Yassim's death. Now, initially, he was found not guilty of 2 of the counts for Mariam and Chris, and the court said it's because that they were already in the process of dying. Not necessarily true. Like, we know that Mariam had, like, from his biopsy, there was no confirmation that he had cancer and needed that surgery right away. I guess for Chris, yes, he did have cancer, and then, but then with Dr. Macchiarini saying like, oh, we're removing the windpipe and replacing it with a non-cancer windpipe, the risk was gone then. It's not like he had cancer throughout his body. That was removed. So I don't know. And then for Yassim, he was found guilty of causing bodily harm. Initially, he received a suspended sentence and was able to leave Sweden. He was put on probation for 2 years and not going to spend a day in jail. Then, June of this year, 2023, he appealed it, which I think is like, I don't know, like just delulu or arrogant. I don't know what it is. Like, you didn't have jail time. But then this time when he did this, the appeals court actually convicted him of bodily harm in all 3 cases. So from that, he was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison. And I mean, oh my God. I guess like in hindsight, like it's better than no jail time, and it's some form of justice for Mariam and Chris and their families. But I mean, it's just like, I don't know, it's got to be devastating. And there are so many more patients who died. To me personally, I think it's terrifying because it is like a slap on the wrist and almost like sends the message, to the medical field or people wanting to experiment, like, hey, as long as you have informed consent, even if you get it under coercion and lies, like it's okay to have humans as your test subjects. Like you don't need to go through all the other hoopla. And I just go back to like little baby Hannah all the time, like 2.5 years old. Like I don't know, like to me, it's just like, that's a whole other level of evil to try. Like you knew this was failing. You knew there were faults. Like there was nothing being adjusted to improve it. And like, not only are these like adult lives disposable to you, but just like this little baby. Allegedly, he still has his license. So that means that in countries where, like once he's out, when these stories are not heavily shared or accessible, he's like pretty much free to carry on undetected or try to continue to justify his mission. He's also allegedly appealing the decision that was given by the appellate court to the Supreme Court and continues to deny any wrongdoing. And I don't know, the whole thing is just scary because I was speaking to one of my friends about this, and it's like we trust our surgeons. I've had a few surgeries where it's just like, of course you get nervous before surgery. You're just like, for me, it's like the anesthetic thing. I'm too much of a control freak. I'd rather just be like awake for it and know what's going on as opposed to be like being put to sleep. But that's the thing, you go to bed. You have no say. You don't know what's going on. And you're essentially in the hands of a stranger. Like you don't build like too much of a close rapport relationship with your surgeon. It's very professional and it's like very cut and dry. I mean, even with him, it seems like he took it sometimes even to an additional level of that comfort. So why would you ever be concerned? Like there was a quote that I read in one of the articles from Dr. Jordan, and it was haunting. He was like, no one is more powerless than a patient with a disease. And I think I feel that on so many levels because you're powerless of like this disease potentially if it's like a very traumatizing one or deadly one, but also I think like in vulnerability wise too, like and emotionally you're desperate, right? Like anybody is going to do what they can to survive and have a better quality of life if that is what the option is that's being given to you. And I just it's so upsetting on so many levels because like I said in the beginning, the idea is great. Who doesn't want to get on board with something like this and save lives and be a part of this moment in history where so many more lives can be saved and we're not counting on donor organs. And to just like put that trust and then know that he knew what he did and continued without adjusting. Like, that's where I always go back, because it's like, yes, of course, this is part of it. It's an experiment, but we didn't even do the proper experiment. I could go on forever. I'm not going to, because I'm starting to rage. I do want to end off with Benita here. Allegedly, Benita, because of all of this, started a company to help other women who have been victims of people like Paolo. He seems like a Pablo. The only Pablo that I know is like Pablo Escobar, so that's why I go negative. Sorry if your name's Pablo and you're lovely. But his name's not Pablo anyway, it's Paolo. Her mission now is to, like empower these women who have also gone through something like this in their life. Let them know that they're, not alone, and that this situation does not define them. It's not the end. There's so much more to, learn from and go on and grow from. And I guess she's also an executive producer on a new true crime series that's going to be, or is currently on, Investigation Discovery. So Benita, if you see this, girl, that is up my alley. Holla at me. Also love nothing more than to castrate POS powerful men who abuse their power. And I love to just like embarrass them and take them down. So if you want to collaborate. Anyways, okay, you guys, I gotta go. I'm starting to rage. I'm starting to go crazy. And I think a little bit of it has to do with the intense double shot of espresso that I put in this iced coffee. But we made it through. Thank you for staying here. I know this was a long one. I love and I appreciate you so much. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. You have no idea how much it helps me grow. We are growing daily and I'm just so excited to see that. I just get so excited about like what can happen in the future and like how many people we can help. And I don't know, I see the vision. And we're getting there. And I'm so thankful for all of you for being a part of it, because I know it's so cheesy and cliche to say, but it's like, hey, that rhymed. But anyways, I literally couldn't do this without you and your support and being here and showing up every single week. So thank you. I will see you in the next video. I will truly miss you terribly until then. I say it all the time, but it's a true statement. I miss you when I'm not around and when you're not around. So I will miss you. Make sure to love each other. Love yourself. And I will see you soon.